He slammed the divorce papers onto the table so hard that a cup rattled and spilled a thin stream of tea across the wood. The sound cracked through the kitchen like a slap. For a second I just stared at the papers. Edges curled, his heavy signature pressed into the first page as if he wanted to carve the letters into my skin instead of the paper. Before you press play, take a deep breath. Because this story will remind you how powerful a quiet woman can be. Sign them, he said. Right now. His voice was loud enough for the neighbors to hear. That was the point. He wanted an audience. Even at 65, I could recognize the childish pride in his tone. The satisfaction of a man who believed he'd finally cornered the woman who had stood beside him for 40 years. I didn't reach for the papers. I didn't stand up. I didn't even flinch. Instead, I folded the small dish towel in my hands and placed it neatly on the counter. The kitchen clock ticked behind me, steady and slow. It was 7:42 p.m., just late enough that the street outside was quiet, but early enough that every window facing ours still had its lights on. He wanted witnesses. He had no idea I was documenting everything. His girlfriend leaned in the doorway behind him, arms crossed, lips twisted into a smirk. She thought I didn't notice. She wore one of my cardigans. She must have found it in the spare room drawer, and she carried it like a trophy, as if draping it over her shoulders made my life hers. I took a slow breath, pretending to steady myself when really I was listening. Her voice, low and eager, whispered, "Just get her out tonight. Why drag it any longer?" He didn't respond, but his shoulders squared, and that was enough for her. She lifted her chin, triumphant. I wiped the tea spill with the towel, feeling the fabric soak up the warmth. My movements were calm, too calm for his liking. He preferred when I panicked or raised my voice. It made him feel stronger. Tonight I gave him nothing. "You have 36 hours, he barked, pushing the papers closer. "She and I start fresh tomorrow. This whole place will be ours." Ours. The word slipped from his mouth like poison. The house I cleaned for decades, the yard I planted with my own hands, the business I built with him from scratch. He thought all of it could belong to a woman who hadn't lived through a single hardship by his side. I picked up one of the papers with 2 fingers, just enough to glance at the top lines. The print was slightly blurry in places, not from tears, but from the smudge caused earlier when I'd handled the original documents he didn't know I had. The copies he brought me tonight were ones he prepared in a hurry, not noticing the missing clause on page 6. He never was the detail-oriented one. He skimmed. I read. "Why are you smiling?" he snapped. I hadn't realized I was. I smoothed my expression, though inside something sharp flickered. It wasn't victory, not yet. It was quiet awareness. Preparation. A sense of distance from the moment, as if I were both present and watching from far away. His girlfriend stepped further into the kitchen. The overhead light caught her earrings, long gold, too expensive for the excuse he'd given me last month about a client gift. I remembered when I saw the receipt in his jacket. I remembered when I photographed it. She brushed past him and started opening cabinets, acting as if she were already the lady of the house. The soft clatter of plates grew louder with each door she opened. She was looking for something: space, control, ownership. I felt my jaw tighten, but I stayed still. The refrigerator hummed. The clock ticked. Outside, a dog barked once and then fell silent. The world was shockingly normal for a night like this. "Did you hear me?" he said, banging the table again. "Sign." I finally looked up at him fully. His face was flushed, sweat dotting the edges of his hairline. He wasn't angry, he was nervous. His bravado was too loud, too forceful. I'd seen this version of him before years ago when he was lying about smaller things: misplaced money, unexplained absences, the sudden appearance of a new cologne. This was the same pattern. Anger to mask fear. "I'll need time to read through everything," I said softly. "You know I don't sign anything blindly." His eyes narrowed. He knew that sentence. I said it when we first opened our business, when we bought the house, when we signed every large contract. He used to respect that about me. Tonight it annoyed him. "You don't need to read it," he muttered. "It's simple." "Nothing is simple," I replied. For a moment, his gaze flickered to the cabinet above the sink. That was where we kept the financial ledgers. He looked away quickly, as if catching himself. A small twitch. But I saw it. Then came the unsettling part. The part that told me everything I suspected was true. His girlfriend picked up the spare house keys from the counter. The keys weren't visible earlier. They had been in the drawer under the phone stand. She must have taken them when they arrived. She held them up and said, "Should I change the locks tonight or tomorrow?" He hesitated for half a second, just long enough for me to catch the truth behind the hesitation. She wasn't waiting for me to move out. She was planning to keep me from coming back. I looked at the thin gold bracelet on her wrist. I remembered seeing that bracelet on a credit card statement months ago. Business supply, he had called it. I took the phone bill from the stack near the door, my hand brushing the envelope lightly. Another habit he forgot. I matched every number on every bill. I remembered noticing the strange charges. None of this was new to me. I walked past the kitchen table and into the dining room, each step measured. I opened the drawer of the oak sideboard, pulled out the small metal key and walked down the hallway. I could feel their eyes following me. The house seemed oddly still. The faint smell of lemon cleaner lingered from earlier that day. The floorboards creaked under my slippers. A distant car drove by, its headlights brushing the front windows before disappearing. I reached the bedroom and closed the door behind me gently. The lamp on the dresser cast a soft glow across the room. My wedding photo still sat on the shelf, slightly tilted. I straightened it, not out of sentiment but habit. I crouched beside the bottom drawer of my dresser and unlocked it with the small key. Inside lay the folder, thick, worn at the edges, organized with labeled separators. Every document inside was something he didn't think I had. Bank statements he tried to hide, receipts for luxury items he claimed were gifts from clients, cash withdrawals he couldn't explain, and email printouts he thought were deleted forever. I lifted the folder and felt its weight. Heavy. Purposeful. A soft knock sounded behind me. Not gentle. More like he was trying to test the door without fully committing to opening it. "What are you doing?" he called. His voice was controlled, but underneath it was the tremor of a man who suddenly realized he didn't know everything happening in his own house. "Packing a few things," I said. "You said 36 hours. The silence stretched. I could hear him breathing through the crack at the bottom of the door. "Don't take too long," he finally muttered. I waited until his footsteps retreated before slipping the folder into my purse. Then I stood still, listening again. I heard low whispers. A sharp exhale from her. A frustrated sigh from him. A drawer sliding open. Another slam. I took one last look around my bedroom, not in sadness but in clarity. Every corner of the room held a memory, but memories weren't what I needed. Evidence was. When I stepped back into the hallway, they were standing side by side. Her with crossed arms. Him with clenched fists. He opened his mouth, ready to unleash whatever he had left. But I walked toward him slowly, purse over my shoulder, expression calm and unreadable. When I reached the kitchen doorway, I stopped and met his eyes. "Is there anything else you want to say before I leave?" I asked. He smirked, a hollow, shaky smirk, and replied, "Yes. Make it quick." I smiled. A small, knowing smile that made him shift his weight and glance nervously at his girlfriend. "I will," I said. And I walked out. Not defeated, not broken, but holding the one thing he never expected. The real power. But I didn't let that thought linger. Power only matters when you know how to use it, and tonight I needed to think clearly. The cold night air brushed my face as I stepped outside, grounding me. The porch light flickered behind me. He hadn't fixed it in years. And for once, the dim glow felt comforting. It hid my expression as I opened my purse and gently touched the folder inside. The edges pressed against my fingers, reminding me that everything I needed was already in place. I walked to my car slowly, not rushing, not stumbling. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes. I could hear him and his girlfriend arguing inside the house. Muffled, sharp tones, but I didn't turn back. I simply unlocked the car, sat down, and placed the folder on the passenger seat. For a moment I just looked at it. The folder was old, the kind you buy on sale and end up reusing over the years. Its corners were frayed, the color faded. But inside was the truth he believed he had successfully buried. I clicked on the small overhead light. The document seemed to glow under the weak bulb. Bank statements. Email printouts. Screenshots. Photos of receipts. Handwritten notes I made late at night when he thought I was asleep. And the most important piece. A list of dates and times that didn't match anything he had ever told me. I felt my pulse slow, not quicken. That calmness surprised me. I thought I would be shaking after the way he had thrown those papers at me, after the humiliation he tried to force on me, after watching another woman walk around my kitchen like she owned it. But no. I felt steady. Maybe that comes with age. When you're younger, betrayal burns. It screams. It makes you want to throw things or break down. But when you're older, when you've seen people reveal who they truly are, you learn to let the anger settle into something weightier, something cold and precise. I opened the first section of the folder. The familiar pattern of numbers greeted me. Transfers between accounts I didn't recognize. Frequent withdrawals at times he claimed he was home asleep. Cash deposits made at a bank branch far from ours. And then there were the purchases. Jewelry, hotel stays, plane tickets for seminars, that I later learned never existed. The signs were always there, but he counted on one truth. Older women don't look too closely. He was wrong about that. I tilted the folder slightly and one sheet slid forward. A printed email from 6 months ago. I remembered the exact night I found it. He had left his phone face down on the couch but forgot to turn off notifications. When I picked it up to move it, the screen lit up with a message preview from her. That was the first time I saw the nickname she used for him, one I never heard from his mouth. He had sworn they were just friends back then. But the dates in the email didn't lie. The attachments didn't lie. The receipts for gifts didn't lie. And tonight when she held my house keys like a prize, well, that didn't lie either. I carefully returned the email to its place and opened the next divider. This section held something different. Copies of business records. These were harder to gather. For years, I handled the front desk work while he managed the finances. He thought I was clueless. He thought paperwork bored me. But boredom wasn't the issue, trust was. Or rather, the slow, steady erosion of trust. Months ago, I began noticing the numbers weren't lining up. Invoices missing. Payments delayed without evidence. New suppliers I had never heard of. My questions irritated him, so I learned to stop asking. Instead, I copied, scanned, saved, and documented every discrepancy. My fingers skimmed through the pages and I felt a tightness in my chest. Not fear, but recognition. Every sheet represented a moment I had chosen not to confront him, a moment I saved for later. And later had arrived tonight, sooner and louder than I expected. I reached the final divider labeled simply, Personal Notes. This was the part that still stung. Inside were pages of thoughts I had written late at night to keep myself from forgetting, the emotional shifts, the subtle changes, the silences that grew too long, the missing explanations, the deflated excuses. I flipped one open. A date circled in blue ink. The day I first suspected he wasn't coming home from work. I read my own handwriting. He didn't call. He didn't answer. He came home smelling like a perfume I don't own. The letters felt foreign, almost like reading a stranger's story. But it wasn't a stranger. It was me months ago, still hoping to be wrong. I took a deep breath and closed the section. The night around me had grown quieter. The porch light flickered again. A passing car slowed down, curious maybe, before driving off. Somewhere in the distance, a neighbor's dog barked. I pressed the folder shut gently. I had enough. More than enough. But I didn't drive home, not yet. I started the car and instead drove to the small park near the edge of the neighborhood. It was nearly empty, just a few scattered lights reflecting off the still pond. I parked under the lamppost for better visibility and opened the folder again. This time I looked not for evidence of his betrayal, but for the pattern, the structure of everything he had tried to hide. My eyes traced the sequence of transfers again. September, October, December, January. Regular. Intentional. Increasing. He wasn't just unfaithful. He was preparing for a new life. A life I wasn't supposed to be in. And that was why he had rushed the divorce papers. Why he had given me 36 hours. Why his girlfriend walked around like she already owned everything. They weren't waiting for a separation. They were trying to erase me. The realization didn't hurt the way I expected it to. Instead, it clarified something inside me. It straightened my spine. It warmed my palms. It replaced the ache with purpose. I moved to the final page of the folder. The timeline I had created. Dates. Amounts. Account numbers. Names. Locations. Proof. All of it meticulously matched and categorized. I had been gathering these details quietly for months without realizing why. And now, seeing everything lined up in perfect order, I finally understood. I hadn't been preparing for heartbreak. I had been preparing for protection. My protection. And if he wanted a war, he had already lost the first battle. As I was adjusting the papers, a small slip fell out of the folder. A printed message. One line from him to her. Once she signs, everything is ours. A chill went through me. Not fear, certainty. I folded that message carefully and placed it at the top. It would become important later. Very important. The park lights flickered, drawing my attention back to the quiet world outside the car. A couple walked by at a distance, heads down, hands clasped. I watched them for a moment, not with envy, but with an understanding I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a long time. Love and betrayal never come from strangers. They come from the ones you trusted the most. I closed the folder, placed it back into my purse and rested my hand on top of it. I didn't know exactly how tomorrow would unfold. But I knew who I needed to call. I knew what steps I needed to take. And I knew, deep in my bones, that he had no idea what he had awakened inside me. As I started the car to drive home, one final thought settled in my mind with cold clarity. He believed he held all the cards. But I held something much stronger. The truth he never thought I would find. The truth he never thought I would find stayed with me all night, humming quietly beneath every breath I took. I drove home slowly from the park, the streetlights casting long yellow lines across the windshield, each one passing like a reminder of the moments I had survived. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't need noise. My thoughts were loud enough. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the house looked different. Not because anything had changed physically, but because I had changed. I no longer saw it as the place where we built a life together. I saw it as the place he tried to erase me from. And that realization made every shadow feel sharper. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The living room was dim, the lamp by the sofa still on from earlier. I set my purse on the coffee table and stood for a moment, letting the silence settle. My hands were cool, but the rest of me felt warm, steady, almost firm. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water and opened the window slightly. The cold air drifted in, carrying the faint scent of pine from the yard. It calmed me, grounded me, reminded me that not everything in my life was broken. I reached into my purse and lifted the folder again. Even the weight of it seemed different now. Heavier with purpose. I placed it on the table and sat down. My phone was next to it, screen dark. I touched it lightly and the screen lit up, reflecting my face, tired, lined, but steady. It was 7:12 a.m. I hadn't slept. But I wasn't tired, not in the way exhaustion usually felt. This was a different kind of alertness, the kind that comes when you finally decide to stop shrinking. I opened the phone app. My finger hovered over a number I hadn't dialed in months. My attorney. I took a breath and pressed call. The line rang 3 times before his voice came through, groggy but alert enough to recognize my name. "Good morning," he said. "Is everything okay?" "No," I said softly. "But it will be." There was a pause. A respectful one, the kind someone gives when they know not to interrupt a woman who has reached her final limit. "What happened?" he asked. I glanced at the folder. "I have documents you need to see," I said. "A lot of documents." He asked me to come to his office in an hour. I agreed, hung up and sat there staring at the phone. That call was the first domino. Once it fell, the rest would follow. I didn't have long before he and his girlfriend realized I wasn't at the house. And I didn't want them guessing where I had gone. I grabbed the folder, tucked it inside my purse again and slipped on my shoes. Before leaving, I turned off the kitchen light and took one last look around the room. The chairs, the counter, the photo frames on the wall. They all felt like witnesses. They had seen everything he tried to take from me. But today they would witness something else. I stepped outside and locked the door. The morning was bright, the sun still low on the horizon. Birds were beginning to chirp. People were watering their lawns or heading to work. Normal morning routines everywhere except inside me. I drove to the attorney's office in quiet determination. When I arrived, his secretary waved me in, her face softening when she saw I looked tense but composed. He stood when I entered his office. "You look resolved," he said gently. "I am." We sat across from each other. I placed the folder on the desk and slid it toward him. "This is everything," I said. He opened it slowly, expecting a few pages. Nothing more. But when he saw the stack, he raised his eyebrows. "Where did you get all this?" "I collected it over the past year," I replied. His expression changed. Not pity. Respect. He started reading through the first section. The room was quiet except for the sound of paper shifting and the occasional hum of his computer. This is damning, he said. I nodded. There's more. He flipped to the next divider. His face tightened as he read the transfers. You know this is serious, he said. I do. He reached the email printouts, the messages, the receipts. This is beyond infidelity, he murmured. This is misconduct, financial deception, possible fraud. And these dates, these aren't small mistakes. These are intentional actions. I looked out the window as he continued reading. Cars passed by, people walked down the sidewalk, life went on unaffected. But in that tiny office, something irreversible was happening. After a few minutes, he leaned back in his chair. We need to move quickly, he said. Very quickly. He pulled out a legal pad and began writing down a list. Names of agencies, departments, places to file reports. He explained the possible outcomes, but I didn't interrupt. I had no interest in the legal language. I cared only about the truth being acknowledged. Then he looked at me and asked a question I wasn't expecting. When did you know? He said softly. I didn't know, I answered. Not at first. But I felt it. And I listened to that feeling. He nodded. Good intuition is a kind of evidence too, he said. He stood up, walked to the filing cabinet and returned with a form. We file this first, he said. It starts everything. I signed it without hesitation. Then he added, you understand, once this begins his reaction will be unpleasant. I met his gaze. He threw divorce papers at me, I said. In front of his girlfriend. In my kitchen. He didn't ask anything else. After filing the initial report electronically, he printed the confirmation and handed it to me. This is your protection, he said. I folded it carefully and placed it in my purse beside the folder. My heart beat steadily, not fast, not slow. Just steady. When I left the office, the sun was higher, warming the street. I took a deep breath and walked to my car. Before I opened the door, I looked at my phone. A missed call. His number. And a voicemail. My stomach tightened, not in fear but in anticipation. I pressed play. His voice came through harsh and frantic. Where are you? We need to talk. This isn't funny. There was a second message. Pick up the phone. Now. And a third. Answer me. I didn't call back. Instead, I sat in the car for a moment, the sun warming my hands on the steering wheel. I allowed myself one small smile, not of triumph but of clarity. He knew something was wrong. He just didn't know how wrong. I turned the key in the ignition and drove away, leaving his messages unanswered. For now. Because once the first call went out, nothing would ever be the same again. That truth settled into me like a quiet, steady pulse as I drove home from the attorney's office. The morning sun fell across the dashboard in long, warm stripes, but inside my chest, everything felt cool and centered. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't doubting. I wasn't even catastrophizing the way women my age are often expected to. I was simply ready. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed immediately that his car wasn't there. For a brief moment, I wondered if he'd gone looking for me. But then I saw the blinds in the living room move, just slightly as if someone had stepped away from the window. That tiny flicker told me everything I needed to know. She was still inside. I stepped out of the car slowly, locking the door behind me and walked toward the house. The air smelled like damp earth from last night's dew. A few leaves clung to the walkway. Everything looked ordinary, but the stillness had a different weight to it, a kind of anticipation. When I opened the front door, she was standing in the hallway. Arms crossed. Chin lifted. Shoulders too straight for someone who claimed she wasn't worried. You didn't answer his calls, she said. He's furious. I know, I replied. My voice surprised her. It was calmer than she expected. That alone made her shift her weight. She followed me as I walked into the kitchen. The morning light spilled across the tile, turning everything soft except for her expression, which was set in a tight, irritated line. He says you're playing games, she continued. He wants to talk. He has my number, I said, setting my purse down on the counter. She scoffed. He said you're ignoring him. I am. Her eyes narrowed. Why? I didn't answer the question. Instead, I opened the refrigerator and took out a bottle of water. The cold air brushed against my wrist, grounding me. When I turned around, she was still staring at me, but with something new in her eyes. Uncertainty. Not fear yet. But close. I don't know what you think you're doing, she said. But he's not going to let you ruin things. You can't just. I cut her off gently. Did he tell you everything he's been doing? She blinked. What is that supposed to mean? Exactly what it sounds like. Her arms dropped to her sides, but I noticed a flicker in her expression. The smallest sign that she did know something wasn't right, even if she wouldn't admit it. I didn't stay to elaborate. I walked past her, down the hallway, into the room that used to be my sewing space before he told me to clear it for storage. I opened the window to let in some fresh air and glanced at the clock. 9:27 a.m. The attorney said the first department would receive my report within 2 hours. The second would process their copy by midday. The third, well, they didn't move quickly unless they recognized the pattern, and he had left them quite a pattern. I walked back to the dining room and sat in the chair closest to the window. She hovered in the doorway. Where did you go this morning? She asked. Out, I said. That's not an answer. It doesn't need to be. She crossed her arms again, but her posture wasn't as strong now. He said you're being dramatic. I almost laughed. Dramatic. The word he always used when he didn't want to admit he was wrong. Instead I said, tell him I'll speak to him later. She frowned. He wants to speak now. I don't. I saw her jaw clench. She wasn't used to being denied anything. Not by him and certainly not by me. She opened her mouth to argue, but before she could say a word, the front door unlocked. He walked in with the swagger of a man who believed he was still in control. But the moment he saw me sitting calmly at the table, something in his expression flickered. You're finally home, he said sharply. We need to talk. Yes, I replied. We do. He looked at her first, then back at me. Why didn't you answer your phone? Because I didn't feel like it. His face hardened. This isn't a joke. No, I said softly. It's not. He took a step closer. So where were you? Out. That's not. It's all you're getting for now. He opened his mouth, angry, but before he could continue, the doorbell rang. The firm. Once. His girlfriend tensed. He froze. I didn't move. Are you expecting someone? She whispered. No, he said. Not this early. The bell rang again, louder this time. I stood up slowly. Neither of them followed. When I opened the front door, 2 officers stood on the porch. Not aggressive, not hostile, just official. Their uniforms were crisp. Their expressions neutral. Good morning, the taller one said. Is he home? I stepped aside without speaking. The moment they saw him, the younger officer pulled a document from a folder. We have some questions regarding financial discrepancies connected to your business, he said. We need you to come with us. His girlfriend gasped. This must be a mistake. It's not, I said quietly. He spun toward me, eyes wide. What did you do? Nothing, I replied, meeting his gaze. They're here because of what you did. His breath hitched, and he looked at the officers again. This is ridiculous. I didn't do anything. That's what we're here to determine, one officer said. Please get your ID. He stormed down the hallway, footsteps heavy and uneven. His girlfriend followed him, whispering frantically. Their voices rose and fell behind the closed bedroom door. I stayed standing in the living room. The house felt different now, lighter somehow, as if all the hidden tension had finally surfaced into the open. He returned a minute later, face pale, hands shaking slightly despite his attempt to hide it. This isn't real, he muttered. It can't be. But it was. As the officers escorted him outside, he turned to me with a look I had never seen. Not anger, not superiority, but disbelief. You did this, he said. I didn't answer. Silence can be its own truth. They guided him toward the car. His girlfriend stood in the doorway, hands trembling, mascara starting to smudge. When the cruiser door closed behind him, she looked at me with a mixture of accusation and fear. You ruined his life, she whispered. No, I replied. He ruined his own. I walked past her back into the kitchen and sat down. Through the window I watched the officers pull away with him in the back seat. The car turned the corner slowly, disappearing from view. But the collapse wasn't over. Not even close. About 5 minutes later her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her face draining of color. Another buzz. And another. What is it? I asked. She swallowed hard. Some notifications. About. She hesitated, then held up her phone just enough for me to see the headlines. Business under investigation. Financial irregularities surface. Owners asked to provide records. I knew the reports would move quickly, but I didn't expect the ripple effect to begin this fast. Her breathing grew uneven. She grabbed her purse, muttering something about finding a lawyer, and rushed out without even closing the door behind her. I walked over and gently shut it. Then I returned to the living room. The house was quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet as before. This quiet held depth. Possibility. Freedom. I sat down in the same chair where he had once thrown documents at me, and I let the silence settle. Today was only the beginning. The collapse had started. And there was no stopping it now. I stayed seated in the quiet living room for several minutes, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a lawnmower somewhere down the street. The house felt strangely empty without the constant pressure of his presence. My shoulders lowered almost on their own, as if something heavy had finally slid off them. The silence wasn't frightening anymore. It felt like the first honest sound I'd heard in years. But I knew the quiet wouldn't last long. Within an hour, the phone began buzzing again. Calls from numbers I didn't recognize, each one leaving a message that sounded more frantic than the last. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The consequences had already been set in motion. I walked into the kitchen and made myself a cup of tea, watching the steam rise slowly from the mug. The large front window glowed softly as the morning sun shifted, illuminating the dust particles floating through the air. It felt symbolic somehow, tiny pieces of a life being rearranged. I had just taken my first sip when a knock echoed through the house. This one wasn't sharp or official. It wasn't hesitant either. It landed somewhere in the middle. Firm, hurried, unsure. I walked slowly to the door. When I opened it, he was standing there. No officers. No girlfriend. No arrogance masking fear. Just him, shoulders slumped, eyes tired and wild, hair messier than I'd ever seen it. They let me go, he said, almost breathless. For now. I stepped aside but didn't invite him in. He walked inside anyway, pacing back and forth like a man who had spent the last hour running from something he didn't know how to face. You don't understand what you've done, he said. They're talking about freezing everything. They're questioning everything. They said there were documents, copies of documents, pointing to me. Someone tipped them off. He looked directly at me. It was you. I didn't answer. The truth no longer needed my voice. He rubbed his hands together anxiously. Just talk to me. Explain why you did this. After everything, after our whole life, you're going to destroy me like this. That word, destroy, echoed. I let it sit between us. Finally I said, you destroyed yourself. I just stopped protecting you from it. His mouth opened then closed again. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. We can fix this. We can work together. You can help me explain the discrepancies. You know the business. You can back me up. There it was, the old manipulation wrapped in desperation. But something was different now. I wasn't the same woman who once softened every time he looked overwhelmed. You want me to lie for you? I asked. No, just help me clarify things. They're confused. No, I said. They're not. He stared at me, genuinely puzzled, as if he couldn't comprehend a world where I didn't bend to his needs. You don't have to do this, he said. Even if you hate me, don't throw everything away. I set my tea down gently. You already threw everything away, I said. You just didn't think I would ever pick it back up. His shoulders sagged. His voice cracked. I loved you once. Then you should have acted like it. He stopped speaking. The truth had finally scraped through whatever denial he was clinging to. He looked around the living room like it belonged to a stranger. And then he whispered something so soft I barely caught it. Did you ever plan for this? All of it. I let silence answer. Because the truth? Even I wasn't sure when my preparation had become survival. When survival had become strategy. When strategy had become a quiet, righteous storm. He took one final step toward me, lowering his voice in a last attempt at control. They think you have more, he said. They want to see everything. If you cooperate, they said they'll be lenient. I held his gaze steadily. And do you want me to help them be lenient? He swallowed hard. Yes. Well, I said softly, then you should have treated me better. The way his face twisted, hurt, disbelief, confusion, would have shattered me years ago. But today it barely grazed me. He pressed his palms against his forehead. She left me, he muttered. As soon as the officers pulled up, she packed a bag and left. Didn't even wait. He let out a hollow laugh. Guess she wasn't built for storms. I didn't feel pity. Not anymore. Just a quiet sadness for the years I lost. He walked toward the door slowly as if unsure of how he'd gotten there. Are you really going to let my life fall apart? He asked, voice breaking. No, I said truthfully. I'm going to let the truth fall where it needs to. He closed his eyes for a moment, then nodded, as if accepting something he could no longer outrun. When he walked out, I didn't watch him go. I simply closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling a breath I didn't know I'd been holding for months. The house was silent again. But this time the silence didn't just feel honest. It felt earned. Hours passed with no interruptions. I made lunch. I watered the plants he always forgot about. I folded the laundry I had left in the dryer. Ordinary things, small pieces of life I was reclaiming. Then just after 3 I received a call. Not from him. Not from her. From my attorney. It's done, he said. The agencies accepted the full filing. They reviewed everything. And because you provided the documentation first, they'll treat you as the protected party. The house, the business assets, the accounts, everything falls under your protection pending review. I closed my eyes. For a long moment I didn't speak. Then I said quietly but firmly, thank you. When I hung up, I walked to the living room window and looked out at the small front yard. The lawn I had tended, the flowers I planted each spring, the porch he wanted to repaint but never bothered to. It wasn't just a yard anymore. It was mine. I stood there for several minutes, letting the weight of it settle. The freedom. The stability. The justice. The closure. Then, for reasons I couldn't fully explain, I opened the front door and stepped outside. The air was warm but the breeze was cool. A perfect balance. The world looked the same as it always had, but nothing felt the same. Not inside me. My neighbor across the street waved. I hadn't realized she was watching. She must have seen the officers earlier. She must have heard the shouting. But she didn't ask anything. She just waved. I waved back. In that small gesture something softened in me. Something released. Something finally healed. I walked to the porch swing, old, creaky, paint chipping, and sat down. The wood was warm beneath me. A leaf drifted from the maple tree by the walkway. A car passed gently down the road. A child laughed somewhere in the distance. Life kept moving forward. And for the first time in a long time, so did I. I closed my eyes, leaned back, and whispered to the quiet afternoon. You tried to leave me with nothing, but I rebuilt everything. And as the wind brushed against my skin, I added one last line, soft, certain, and final. And this time I settle for nothing less than peace. If this story touched your heart, stay with me. I share new stories every day, stories of strength, justice, and women who rise even after being broken. Subscribe so you never miss the next one.